Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome. My name is Richie Nunez. I'm the events and media coordinator here at Outco. Thank you so much for joining us. As more and more people are trickling in, I actually wanted to ask, where's everybody calling from? If you could drop your city in the chat, I'd be curious to know where everyone is calling in from. I actually am in the beautiful Bay Area, as you can see by my background. Okay, cool. We got Toronto in the house. Welcome, Mona. Welcome. Where else are folks calling in from? And Carlos, we got you out in the East Coast, right?
Yeah, I'm over in Boston, like right in the heart of Chinatown.
Right on. We got PA in the house as well. Well, as more and more folks are coming in, I actually wanted to just go ahead and jump right into it. I'm going to start screen sharing here. And can you all see my screen? If you could give me a six in the chat to let me know.
No, we can't see it.
You aren't able to see it yet? Give me one sec. How about now?
Now, yep.
Awesome. So before we get started, looks like we're out of order here. I wanted to say welcome to Outco's technical whiteboarding workshop. Um, and this is the event overview. You could be anywhere else here, so I just wanted to take the time to say thank you and thank you so much for joining us and dedicating yourself to the betterment of you and learning some real cool things about whiteboarding. So the way that this is gonna look is we're gonna do a quick intro. We'll start with an intro to Outco, to myself, and to Carlos. And after that, we're gonna be hosting a short conversation, Carlos and I, on the top five whiteboarding questions. It'll be a great opportunity for you to start thinking about the questions you want to ask at the end of the event. And then from there, Carlos will be presenting on how to whiteboard effectively, and we'll be ending the event with a short Q&A at the end. So just a quick introduction to Outco. Outco is a 4-week job accelerator built for software engineers. It was founded in 2015 in San Francisco. It's a coaching and skill sharpening service that's placed over 2,000 software engineers anywhere in from nonprofits to startups to FAANG companies, including Facebook, Amazon. Um, Classes are offered in Eastern Standard Time and Pacific Standard Time zones, and we have a bunch of free resources coming to you at the end of the event. A little bit about me. Again, I'm the Outco Events and Media Coordinator. I went to San Diego State University. I'm also in charge of the Outco alumni community here. And a fun fact, I guess, is that I actually used to be a social worker before I jumped into tech. I really enjoy helping people and helping folks find jobs is part of that for me. And then Carlos, take it away.
Thanks, Richie. Yeah, my name is Carlos Castillo. I went to the Rochester Institute of Technology for my undergrad, and currently I'm pursuing a master's in IT from UMass Lowell. As far as my involvement with tech goes and just what I do for work, I'm at this startup called the Diversity Dashboard, where we provide software as a service for diversity and inclusion folks that are looking to quantify their work and impact. And then by night, I also work at Outco as a technical coach, where I help engineers just like grasp the concepts that we cover in class on data structures and algorithms, but I try to place an emphasis on your communication styles while we go over those concepts, just because knowing how to communicate it is just as important as knowing how to use it. So,
Awesome, thank you. And before we get started on our conversation here, I actually wanted to get a better sense for the room. I'm going to be dropping this poll here. Are you a job seeking software engineer? If you could answer yes or no, just to let us know how many of y'all are currently on the job search, how many of y'all aren't job searching at all right now, just to get a better sense again of who's joining us here. It looks like we have 88% of folks that are here actually saying that they are job searching, and 13% say that they are not. And so I actually wanted to also ask in regards to years of experience, I just launched poll number 2. How many years of experience as a software engineer do you have? It looks like what 80%. No, I'm sorry, 67% about have 1 to 3 years. About 13% have 3 to 6 years, and about 11% looking like we have about 10 plus years here. So definitely a diverse audience here. I'm going to be ending this poll here, and wanted to ask, as you're listening in on our conversation, if you find value and you want to be more connected to other job seeking software engineers, I highly encourage you to select yes on this poll that I'm about to launch here. If you'd like to apply to join our exclusive Outco Slack community consisting of job seeking software engineers, please hit yes. And without further ado, I actually wanted to ask you, Carlos, if you could tell us a little bit more about your tech background, so that the audience can know who it is that's going to be leading this presentation.
Yeah, sure. So, as I mentioned, right now I currently work at a startup where I do a mix of QA and marketing and accounting, just because you have to wear many hats at a startup. And then at Outco, I do the technical stuff with our clients. But before that, how I got introduced was when I was working abroad in Korea. I was a teacher there, and I was looking for ways to modernize our curriculum. So at the time, I was self-teaching myself Python, and I just decided to add it to the curriculum as a way to build up where they could make their own like choose your adventure games. And ever since then, I just decided that I wanted to work like more with tech. So when I came back to the States, that's when I started pivoting more towards tech. And yeah, here I am now getting my master's and stuff. Fun stuff.
Awesome, awesome. I wanted to let the audience members know I had just mentioned that Slack community. I'm actually dropping the invite link to that Slack community in the chat. Um, how would you describe whiteboarding, and why is it important during the technical interview?
Yeah, so we always say that the interview process is a performative one because in your day to day, you're building applications, adding new features, fixing bugs. But in your interview, you're asked to do something like inverting a binary tree, right? So there's this huge dissonance and sometimes even disconnect for people. So if the interview process is a performative one, the whiteboard aspect is also a part of that. And what I mean by performative, you need to showcase your ability to communicate effectively and that you have a strong methodology for problem solving. So those are the two things that I would say are the most important parts of it, and that are your greatest opportunities in highlighting those skills, because that's what they're looking for with onboarding a new potential team member, right?
For someone who's never whiteboarded before in their life, what tips do you have to get them started?
So there's a show I used to watch with my nephew that he really loved called Adventure Time, and I don't remember who, but one of the characters said, "Sucking at something is the first step towards being sort of good at something," right?
I love that.
And to compare that to something like a little bit more profound, like Gother once said that everything is hard until it's easy. That was like a German philosopher. So whiteboarding is a skill, right? And just like any other skills, you have to put in time towards developing it. So if you've never done it before, that's totally okay. Everyone starts out not ever having done it before. So just practice with people. There's many different ways that I'll share later on where you can do that. But don't be afraid to try and not do it right, because it's okay. Like there's no such thing as failure. I always tell people it's just feedback. So get as much practice and experience as you can.
I feel like one of the questions that we get often is in particular about the pandemic. Um, how would you say the pandemic has impacted whiteboarding when it comes to the technical interview process? And do you have any virtual tools that you might be able to offer our audience so that they can practice? Because it's just a different
Yeah.
environment.
No, no, for sure. That's a good question. So obviously almost everything now is remote. So
Mhm.
when it comes to whiteboarding, you're gonna have a couple options to choose from. Like if you have a physical whiteboard and you communicate that to your interviewer, they're gonna want you to probably go grab it and use that as a tool to solve the problem with them, right? And that's fine. But there's a couple potential traps with that, right? Like a lot of people, once they have their whiteboard, will turn their back for the entirety of the interview process,
Yeah.
so that they actually are never communicating to the recruiter, right? Or they're writing so small that the recruiter can't see what they're writing, right? So from there, we tell people that a great skill to develop is getting comfortable with like ASCII art. And for those of you that don't know what ASCII art is, it's like those drawings that people make using like it's entirely done only on with your keyboard, right? It's like
Mhm.
backslashes, slashes, asterisks, like they, all that put together and you draw like Mario, right? So I think you should be able to draw like the decision tree process of like a recursion step, right? Using just ticks and I'm sorry, slashes and whatever values you're putting like that.
Mhm.
If you don't like ASCII art, you could also use like a virtual whiteboard app. I know Zoom has one built in, and if you have an iPad with a stylus, that pairs great. If you don't, you can use like ones that are online as a web app and just use your mouse. It will look like chicken scratch when you like try to draw things, but that's okay. So, yeah, there's many different ways to confront that problem.
Do you have a preference for the web apps? Like, is there one that you like more than the other, or like apps that you can recommend?
Yeah, there's one called awwapp.com, literally just awwapp.com. And yeah, you can invite people to it. So if the interviewer says, yeah, feel free to use that app, you click invite and you share the link with them, and now they can see live everything that you're doing. So you don't have to worry about sharing your screen. They can just see on their own screen. It has different tools like text boxes, so you don't have to worry about writing things by hand. You can just type it, but you can still draw out different shapes or like uh, the trees for recursion. So it's very flexible and very useful.
How would you say a candidate stands out from the crowd during the whiteboard portion of the technical interview process?
So for sure, communication and how you problem solve are the things that are being analyzed the most. So if
Mhm.
you can show a methodological approach in how you solve problems and communicate your solutions or your take on problems at least
Mhm.
effectively, I think you'll be heads and shoulders ahead of the competition because they're going to hire someone that they can work well with on the team. So that means that they can explain why their approach works and that they can demonstrate their ability to problem solve effectively. So even if your answer is right, if no one else has buy-in to your solution, what good does it matter, right? You need to be able to communicate why your solution works, and that requires like having good soft skills, right? So even though it's not, as related as you would think, there's a reason why a lot of engineers have that rep of having horrible soft skills, right? Because we tend to think it's only about the tech side, but being able to interact and collaborate with others is just as important.
Thank you. Do you have any specific methods that you recommend for people who want to whiteboard? I know we're about to go into that in your presentation, but just something quick that you can recommend.
Yeah, for sure. I think you should just practice. I'm going to cover the 4 steps of whiteboarding that we teach at Outco. So practicing those 4 steps, like if I were you, I would go to LeetCode, find an easy problem that you know you can solve, and then practice solving it via diagramming. And if you can demonstrate it via diagramming, then practice solving it with pseudocode and keep going over and over with different easy problems until you're confident that not that you know how to solve these LeetCode problems, but that you know how to use diagramming and pseudocode effectively. So my presentation, like you said, will cover more of that, but yeah, I think it's just a matter of practice. So
Awesome. Thank you so much. That concludes the question or the fireside chat portion of our event here. I'm going to be ending poll 3, actually opening up poll 4. If you find value, in this conversation that we're having, if you find value in the presentation that Carlos is about to present on, please fill out the poll I just launched for an info session on Outco and come to get to know us a little bit more information on what it is that Alco has to offer. I'm going to stop my screen share now, and Carlos, feel free to take it away.
sure. Just 1 sec while I get set up. Okay, can everyone see the presentation? Like you should see Alco's technical whiteboarding workshop.
Yep, that's great.
Yeah, cool. All right. Yeah, so welcome to the workshop part of it. I'm going to highlight what the methodology that we employ here at Outco with our clients on how to whiteboard effectively, go over why we preach those 4 steps, and talk about some common pitfalls that you can avoid, and address any questions that you might have towards the end if we have time. So yeah, let's get started. Oh, if you have a notebook and you want to take notes, I would divide your page. Like if this is your page, I would divide it into fourths. So each quarter of that page will be one of the steps, and you can like appropriately like take notes for that step, and not get confused when you come back later to it. So just a piece of advice. So how to whiteboard effectively. We're going to go over the 4 steps so you understand what they are, some common problems and summary, like I mentioned, and then we're going to highlight some resources for you to either practice those skills or to address what I said before with the remote stuff when it comes to whiteboarding. Like I'll share the AWW app via the chat. So for those of you that have had the opportunity to whiteboard, I want you to take a sec and reflect on some of the emotions that you might have experienced when when you went through that process. A lot of the times people on a client side will report that they felt like fear, anxiousness, defeat, nervousness. That's usually because they're just not prepared when it comes to this type of situation, right? They don't have like a strategy going in or a system or a plan, right? So they're caught a little off guard that not only do they have to solve a problem, but they have to almost like they're doing a talent show performance in front of all these other people, right? While doing it on a whiteboard. So a lot of times that leads to the question of why do we have to do this, right? And like I said before, on a day-to-day basis, you're doing these things that don't seem inherently related to this part of the interview process. But like I said, the 2 things that you're being judged on, the 2 things that you have the opportunity to highlight that you're different from all the other engineers is that you're really good at communicating and that you have like some kind of plan when it comes to problem solving, right? So companies are going to look to gauge you on those 2 things, and it's really important. Like with communication, ask yourself, what kind of communication style do you have? Do you use a lot of body language? Do you kind of mumble to yourself? Are you audible? Do you speak too fast? Those all matter, right? And with problem solving, how do you react under pressure, right? Do you get nervous, or are you able to stay calm, cool, and collected, right? So we'll cover how to even address that if you're not good at managing the anxiety that comes with this as well towards the end. But yeah, moving on. So as you can see, there's 4 steps. I don't know how many of you might know what this is, but I'm sure you've heard of UDP, right? Like UDP versus TCP. They're like the 2 different types of packets that you can send over the internet, right? Like when you hop on your phone and you send a login, right? Like you're either using a TCP connection or a UDP connection. So that's all you need to know. So an easy way to remember the 4 steps are, I'm gonna use my pointer over here. UDP plus C. So the reason I have it set up like that is because coding should be the last thing that you do, right? For those of you that have whiteboarded before, I want you to take a second again to reflect and ask yourself honestly if you actually want to code like right away, right? A lot of people tend to do that, and coding should always be the last step. So I really want to highlight UDP plus C because these are the orders that you should, this is the plan that you can use so that you have a logical order in solving these problems. Because if you go to code straight, you're setting yourself up for failure, because now not only do you have to create an algorithm, but you're going to do it while you're managing a code base, right? That's just not fair to you. So during this next part of the presentation, we're going to dive into each one of the 4 steps, why it's valuable, and how to employ it. So understand, a lot of people think that just by listening to the problem, that's all that is involved with understanding, right? They tend to move away from here pretty quickly. So ask for an example input and output if the recruiter doesn't give it, right? Because maybe your understanding of the problem is actually off base, and having more data points will let you know whether you're on track or not for actually comprehending it, right? If you don't understand the problem, there's no way you're going to solve it, right? So don't move on from this step unless you actually solve it, right? And you'll know if you understand it or not if when you get to the later steps, you're like, I don't know how to diagram the solution, right? Because that probably means you don't know how to actually solve the solution yet, and you're still getting a feel for things, which is fine, but you need to make sure you spend enough time in the understanding step to go on. So yeah, like I said, don't go to the next steps. And it's also important because this is another opportunity for you to showcase how you communicate when you're facing a problem with others, right? Like I always tell people to pretend that the interviewer should to you not be an interviewer. You shouldn't be scared like there's some big bad wolf. They should be like imagine like you're already hired. This person is a colleague. You're facing a problem together, and you're just communicating to a colleague how you would solve this problem and why you think that's the best approach, right? So taking away that power distance and everything and just viewing it as a colleague, you can highlight how effectively you communicate in an actual team setting, right? And that's really valuable to them. So when it comes to this step, write down everything, right? Write it twice, we say, which we call it like what the acronym. So write it twice, write everything twice. And then ask for any edge cases that you can think of, like how that would work, or constraints too. I can't tell you how many times I've seen clients where they start to do a problem for whiteboarding and they haven't even checked what kind of space complexity or time complexity they're expected to achieve, right? Like what good is it if you solve a problem in like, let's say like, I don't know, quadratic like or exponential like time, and the recruiter's like, I want you to do it in linear, right? Like now you have to redo the entire problem in all 4 steps when you could have just asked for that right in the beginning. So it's always really important to ask all these pieces of information up front, because sometimes the interviewers won't volunteer that because they want you to ask that of them. Because again, you're talking to a colleague and you have to, just like in real life, make sure everyone in the room is on the same page in how they solve this problem. So yeah, just leverage a recruiter. For example, sometimes you might come across stuff that you don't understand, or maybe the problem's a bit like confusing or the wording's obfuscated and you just can't grasp its meaning. Ask for more clarification, right? To give you an example, one of the problems that we have our clients do is for whiteboarding practice is to build a base 10 to hexadecimal converter, right? So everyone, for the most part, has heard of hexadecimal. They know it has something to do with base 16, but not a lot of people might have actually seen it represented, right? So many times clients start to like try and draw out their solution in pseudocode, but they actually don't understand how base 16 works. So they're trying to solve a problem that they don't understand yet, right? So that's something where you can leverage your recruiter, have that conversation as if it was an actual colleague, like, hey, I understand the problem, but could you clear up like how exactly does hexadecimal work? Because this is not an exercise in building a base 10 to 16 converter, right? This is an exercise in communication and problem solving, right? That's what you're being graded on. So yeah, like I said, just spend more time here. This step is all about reconnaissance, right? And that's why it's so powerful. So if you move on too quickly, then you're gonna set yourself up for failure for the other steps. So moving on, the next step would be diagramming. So why is diagramming important? This is your first attempt at actually solving the problem. You can leverage this part of the step to come up with a plan of attack that you're going to use for later, right? So if your diagram actually showcases how this problem is solved successfully, then you know your approach is solid, right? Or let's say, actually, no, I'll save that for later. And then when you're actually diagramming, because again, this is a exercise in communication, make sure you use simple and clear variables, right? So you should be able to demonstrate almost like as if you were the machine itself, step by step, how you're solving this algorithm, right? Or how the algorithm proceeds, I'm sorry, or how you're solving the problem. So be in constant communication with the interviewer. You shouldn't like have significant gaps of silence, right? You should always be communicating all the steps that you're going through. And this is useful because like, let's say hypothetically, you think you understood the problem, right? Like you spend a lot of time in step 1 and now you're diagramming, but you have one misconception and it's showing now when you diagram out your solution. Your recruiter is going to see that and can be like, oh, actually, I think you're heading down the wrong path here. What you want to do is X or Y, right? That's really powerful because instead of going to code, they have a visual aid that lets them know what your thought process is, and they're you so that while you still have plenty of time, you can go and adjust your drawing because it's easy to pivot, right? You haven't committed to anything when it comes to code; it's just a drawing. So you want to leverage that. An example of the steps, like when you're stepping through them, you would kind of talk in plain English, like iterate through the arrays, return all even integers, whatever, right? And then use actual variable names instead of just pointer arrows, right? To indicate as you're going through the array. That's like an example of what I mean about being very clear with the things that you use for names, right? Like it's easy to understand that, oh, you have a pointer that's, just going through, or you have two pointers and that's how you're keeping track of values. But having them like clearly labeled, make sure that everyone's on the same page with how these you're stepping through solving this problem. So, like I mentioned before, practice using ASCII art because that's something that I've seen more and more be valuable today. There's also that virtual whiteboard app, like I said, awwapp.com and app.com. And then Zoom also has that whiteboard feature. If you have an iPad and a stylus, it's super useful. That's actually how we conduct a lot of our lectures. So yeah, diagram is really important. It lets you pivot. It lets you first try to solve the problem for the first time. And it's a great way to highlight your communication style. So the next part would be pseudocode. So the job of pseudocode is to jog your memory when it comes time to actually write your code. It should be the bridge between your diagram and your actual code, right? It's another opportunity for you to flesh out your algorithm further. So, fun fact, pseudo comes from the Greek word that means false, in appearance only, resembling. In many classical Greek cities, it was considered heroic to be good at lying, right? It was a virtue. Like, so for example, like the Odyssey, when Odysseus lies and tricks the Cyclops, that was seen as like a heroic thing that he did. So obviously you're not fighting Cyclopses. And I'm not saying that you should be good at lying, but being good at pseudocode is really useful to you, right? This means that you shouldn't actually be writing any code at this stage, right? A lot of people actually start writing out code, especially if they use languages like Python that are already close enough to English. Uh, and you should avoid that. This should be as close to plain English as possible. So an example of that would be like, oh, and the reason why you want to do this is like, let's say hypothetically, you're using like a niche language like Swift or something like that, and your interviewer doesn't really know much about Swift, and you start writing in more code than pseudocode. Again, now they're not on the same page as you, right? And they can't correct you if your approach is wrong, right? So having it in plain English ensures that everyone in the room is on the same page and knows what you're thinking. So an example I always like to do is it should kind of be like a to-do list or like a roadmap of all the parts that you're visiting as you're solving this problem, or all the things that you need to do to solve this problem. So, like loop through arrays, instantiate a result array, return it at the end, create a while loop, and it'll terminate when X happens, right? Like that's like plain English. It's like my nephew who doesn't know any code could probably follow along with most of that, right? So that's why it's so powerful, because this is your second time in solving it, and it's another opportunity to further demonstrate communication style and find bugs or more edge cases that you could test to see if your solution actually works. So there is a spectrum when it comes to pseudocode, and what I mean by that is you either write too much or you write too little, and you're writing too much when your pseudocode is actually longer than your code, right? Then it becomes useless to you because you have to spend so much time just sifting through what you wrote to actually find value in what you need to code. And then on the opposite end, you write too little. And you're there when you actually get to the coding stage and you look at your pseudocode and you're like, what am I supposed to do with this? What do I do next? It's useless to you because it doesn't tell you enough information as to what you did in the diagram to remind you what you actually need to write for code, right? So you want to strike a balance between that and just make sure that it's effective enough in reminding you how you solve the problem and the different parts of it that you need to code out, right? Um, yeah, let's go to the next. Oh, wait, did I pass it? No, okay, sorry, we're on code. Yes, finally code. So this is the process that a lot of you, I'm assuming, probably started out with in your initial times that you've whiteboarded. And just some things to highlight with this is that you really want to pick one programming language throughout the entire job search process. And it should be the one you're most comfortable with. I know to some that's very obvious, but especially people who are self-taught or who are trying to break into tech for the first time, understandably so, they feel like they have to learn like 3 or 4 different languages to be competitive, right? Or they see that jobs are asking for this type of JavaScript and that, and they have to learn all these different frameworks. And I definitely get it, but if your strongest language is Python, and you know that this job you're applying to is Java, don't try to impress them by, doing this in Java. They already have your resume, right? Like if you're there on site or, doing it virtually and you're doing this interview, they know what you have. You're good on paper. That's why they want you here. So don't, add an unnecessary burden to yourself by doing a language that not only are you not that comfortable with, but now will be additional, I guess, like intellectual complexity as you're solving this problem. So yeah, like I said, they're just gauging communication and how you solve these problems. So don't worry too much about the language. Think modularly. So what I mean by that is sometimes you may find yourself like stuck in a rabbit hole of solving a particular part of the problem, and that could end up causing you to waste a lot of time, right? So sometimes the interviewer may just allow you to use a function, for example, without actually coding it out, right? Like let's say you're working with min heaps or max heaps and you need to use a bubble up function. You can just say like, hey, is it okay if I just write bubble up here, or do you actually want me to write out how the bubble up function works? And if they say no, write it out, cool, you've already demonstrated that you can think modularly. If they say yeah, sure, you can do it that way, great, you just saved yourself some time and mental labor, right? So definitely try to employ that approach whenever it's possible. And when it comes to actually testing your solution, you need to make sure it compiles, right, and works, it functions correctly. So run the simple cases that they might have given you a sample and an output, right? See if you got the same thing. Try to eliminate any issues that appear before you submit it. And then when it comes to the communication aspect of it, like I said before, with wet, write everything twice. That's just to keep you on track with solving the problem. But dry, which is the opposite, I know, of wet, is don't repeat yourself. So reiterating what you just said, because you're trying to keep track of all the different ideas that you have in your head, does not come across as effective communication, right? That's why you have your diagram and pseudocode to back you up. You've already solved this problem twice. So use those two things to keep track of what you're communicating, and as you write out your code, right? And be engaging, right? Like no one wants to talk to someone that's really dry, not dry in the sense that I just mentioned, but like vapid, or just not interesting. Don't mumble to yourself, right? That makes it harder for the interviewer to understand you and makes you look as like an ineffective communicator, right? So don't face the board the entire time, like I mentioned before, and just make sure that the interviewer understands your approach. Check in with them from time to time, right? And remember that the communication aspect of this is not a one-way street. You can leverage a recruiter when necessary, like I mentioned before. And let's say like, when you're trying to solve this problem, you're trying to, it's actually harder than you thought it'd be, and you need a couple seconds to gather your thoughts as to come up with a plan of attack. It's perfectly okay to ask the interviewer for some time to think to yourself, as long as you preface that. Like hypothetically, if we were out and we were getting a beer together, and you're like, hey Carlos, how was your week? And my week was horrible. My dog died, my partner left me, I lost all my money in the stock market, it's been a bad week. That's a lot, right? And that's a lot to communicate with that one question. It's a loaded question. So I might just say like, you know what, that's a lot, can I just have a minute to gather my thoughts before I tell you? And your friend will probably be cool with that. Versus if I just stared at my beer for 5 minutes in silence, no one's comfortable at that point, right? So as long as you preface to the interviewer like, hey, I just need a couple seconds to gather my thoughts, is that fine? They'll say yes, and take advantage of that time. Yeah, so don't be afraid of that. Some of the more common problems that we haven't covered yet that I want to talk about is, especially when it comes to managing emotions, it's like, what if I panic, right? Own the problem. And what I mean by that is not like taking responsibility for what you write. Obviously, you should do that. But what I mean when I say own the problem is who's in charge, right? You are the problem. When doing the problem, if you start to feel yourself getting panicked or feeling imposter syndrome, or some other kind of detrimental emotion, take a step back and try to collect yourself. So another fun fact, the part of your body that kicks in during fight or flight responses is called the sympathetic nervous system, right? So that's what triggers your heart rate to accelerate, your breathing to get deeper, because it thinks you're in a fight or flight situation. So it's, oh, I need to I need to get more oxygen so I can then supply it more quickly because of the heart to all the muscles in case I gotta fight or flight, right? So your body doesn't know the difference between like, oh, I'm in danger because of a wild animal versus like, oh, I'm really just stressed about performing well for the whiteboard. And when this like fight or flight response kicks in to the point that it's not useful, right? That's when you start to shut down. So just how the accelerated heart rate and all that stuff makes you breathe quicker, you breathing deeper and slower tricks your brain into thinking you're okay. It can actually lower your heart rate and make you feel less panicked, right? All that hype behind like deep breathing is actually backed by science. So if you get overdose, if you get overwhelmed, just ask for that second to collect your thoughts, take a deep breath in, and just get your composure together. To give you a perspective, like the average human takes, I think, between 12 to 20 breaths a minute, right? Try this when you get at home. So breath is a full in and out. And how much space there is between a breath in and a breath out dictates how fast your heart beats. If you can strive for like 6 breaths a minute, which is harder than you think, you'll notice that you actually feel more relaxed and that you might even feel like your heart rate is slowing down if you time it. So yeah, that's totally a valid tool that you can use during the interview process if you start to get panicked. Um, Another one is, what if I don't know the optimal solution? So if you don't know the optimal solution, mention the brute force approach. That's better than nothing at all, right? Like I said, this is about communication. So even communicating that, like the only thing I can think of is doing it this way, and I know that's a brute force approach. Shows that at least you're forthcoming and that you understand how to solve the problem on some level, maybe just not the way that they want you to do it, right? So another thing I hear is, can I get a hint? And don't ever do that. Instead, describe what you're trying to do and then preface it as if you're asking for advice. So, like, for example, I understand that what we're looking to do here is to employ like a breath first search approach, but I'm not exactly sure about how to go about that. Do you have a suggestion? That sounds 1,000 times better than, can I please have a free hint, right? So, because again, you're talking to your colleague about how you would solve this problem. And if you need to leverage your colleague a little bit for some wisdom, that's fine. Like, think of it in a real world setting. Who wants to work with a person that's like, hey, so and so, I'm really stuck with this problem. Can you take time under your very busy day and come help me, right? Like, no one wants that person. But if you go to a colleague and you're like, hey, sorry to bother you, I know how to do this for the most part, but can I borrow some wisdom from you on this one particular thing? How would you go about doing that? That's way better, right? It's a lot more okay of an ask. So yeah, and then the last question, this is a really good one, is what if I've seen this question before? The short answer is, let the interviewer know. The long answer is, there's 2 reasons why you should let them know. One is integrity, right? Any notion of dishonesty is usually grounds for immediate disqualification. So if the interviewer catches even a whiff that you've seen this problem before and didn't tell them, they might use that as grounds to dismiss you from the process, right? Um, let's say that they're cool with that and they give you another problem that might even be harder. They might even give you more time because they were expecting to give you this certain level problem and the next one is a little bit more difficult. So they'll be like, we'll give this person another half hour, and that benefits you. So that being said, be 100% certain that you know how to actually solve the problem, right? Otherwise, it's not a matter of, I've seen this problem before. I saw like Joker, the movie, like a year and a half ago. I don't remember a lot of the scenes though, right? Like, so tell them like, oh, you know what? I've seen something similar to this problem, and that's okay, right? Maybe the recruiter will say that's fine, go ahead and solve it. Or if they don't, if they give you a problem, cool, you've done your part in being forthcoming, right? So if you just say, I've seen this problem before, and you're not confident in how to solve it, you're just doing yourself a disservice, and you technically have miscommunicated to the recruiter what you're actually trying to say, which is, I saw something like this a long time ago on LeetCode 5 years ago, and I don't remember how to do it, right? So yeah. And then next, for just to summarize everything that we covered, is, like I said before, don't start with code first. You're setting yourself up for failure because you're trying to solve a problem or build an algorithm and also managing the code base. When it comes to the 4 steps, remember it's UDP plus C, right? So understand, diagram, pseudocode, which I know sounds like an S, not a P, but starts with P, and then code. And then ultimately that this is just an opportunity for you to demonstrate your communication style and your process for problem solving. So always be communicating, and it's not just about talking, it's about being engaging, right? But also tell them if you need that minute to gather your thoughts or gain your composure again, right? Whiteboarding is a skill, right? And like at Outco, what we really focus on is not necessarily you learning how to use whiteboarding to solve a problem with dynamic programming, although that's what we'll have you do. It's never about just that dynamic programming. It's about you developing the skill of whiteboarding, which again is the skill of problem solving and communicating, right? So there's something called like the 4 stages of learning. Stage one is where you're doing something wrong and you're not even aware of doing it wrong, right? You're in complete ignorance of why you're inefficient. The next step, step two is, or phase two is, you're doing something wrong, but you're aware of it. You realize that this isn't the best solution. You just don't know how to do it. And maybe you're trying to figure out a better, more optimal solution. Phase three is where you are doing things the right way, but it's a concerted effort. You have to cognizantly tell yourself, like, oh, don't forget to do it this way, right? Stage four is you're doing something right, and it's a subconscious process. You don't even have to think about it anymore. It's like breathing, right? So we really strive by the end of the program to have people at least at phase three. I would say the people that put in the more work into practicing, again, the skills required for whiteboarding, not just solving a problem, will walk away with like phase four, because everyone to a certain extent has some communication skills. It's just about developing them more. And we give you an outline of a plan of attack to solve these problems, right? Like UDP plus C. So yeah. And then lastly, the resources I wanted to highlight. So interview.io. Basically, this is a place where you can practice interviewing with engineers from Google, Facebook, and more anonymously, right? So it's a good way to get better at algorithms and system design problems. You can use it to find a job or just see if you still have the skills necessary to pass a tech screening. I will say they're very busy. They're usually booked for a while. So you have to, I would recommend signing up tonight. And when you feel approximately when you'll start applying for interviews, try and set it up a couple weeks out from now. Yeah. And then we also have free events every month that we do, from cracking the Google or Amazon interview to, whiteboarding to even resume workshops. There's so many free resources out there that we just willingly give to the public. Take advantage of that. That being said, I'll drop in the chat. Can I do that? I don't think I can. No, because I'm in share mode. I will later drop in the chat. Just go to outco.io/events. That's the list of all the events we have upcoming. You can also go to outco.io/ultimate algorithm guide. And it's a free PDF on an effective approach when it comes to solving different types of algorithms, right? Our Medium and YouTube accounts are pretty useful resources. Medium has a bunch of like sample algorithms and problems that you'll have to use for the text screening process. YouTube has tutorial videos and the like. Yeah, so those are really useful. I would say also check out our GitHub. If you go to github.com, then outco SF, and then /prep_material. Again, it's a free repository of tools to help you get ready for job hunting. And I would say that's it for the free stuff. And then we have the Career Accelerator, like Richie mentioned before, which is a 4-week program. And not only is it tech oriented, we also cover the career side of stuff. So we teach you how to manage your energy effectively. This concept called reverse recruiting, which is a more effective way of getting job prospects, negotiating your salary. A lot of people usually walk away with, I think, like a 10 to 20% increase in their salary. Like Richie mentioned before, we have like, I think like an 85 or higher percent job placement rate. And that's, FANG level to small companies to startups. It's entirely based on our clients' like preferred work setting, right? So yeah, I would not dismiss any of these. These are all valuable resources, and up to your discretion how you think it'll best fit with your learning style. So now next is the Q&A section. Feel free to ask any questions and let's get all the jobs. I will stop the screen share now and then drop in the chat all those links that I mentioned.
Thank you so much, Carlos. I actually saw there was a question here that was dropped by Trish. The question is, how are companies performing whiteboarded interviews during COVID? Do you have, can you go a little bit more in depth in regards to that? And everybody
Well,
else, I
Sam,
also encourage
oh,
you
sorry, go ahead.
to go ahead and drop questions in the chat in the Q&A function as well as we're wrapping up our event.
So Will Song and Mushfiq, good looks. It is interviewing.io. I need to fix that. It is not interview.io, interviewing. And then Trish, to answer your question, I doubt that a lot of the bigger tech companies are going to ask you to come in person. Although I have seen clients at smaller places actually be asked to come into the office and go throughout the interview process. It depends entirely when you apply. But for the remote type meetings, like I said before, if you have a physical whiteboard, they might ask you to use that. If you're going to go that route, get comfortable like this is my whiteboard. Get comfortable like drawing and talking and then physically showing them what you're doing, right? Because chances are you're not writing big enough for them to see. If you feel like that's too cumbersome or you're going to be prone to hampering yourself and communicating effectively, use that app I mentioned, awwapp.com. Use the whiteboarding tool that comes baked into Zoom. If you have that I'm sorry, iPad and the stylus. There's also like ASCII art if you feel comfortable in developing that skill as well.
Are you familiar, Carlos, with levels.fyi at all?
Yeah, so that's good for figuring out how much you can expect to be a competitive salary for whatever roles that you're applying at. So we always say that you shouldn't just ask for more money just for the sake of asking for more money. You should always justify your ask. And if you do your research and you know what other companies are paying for a similar, type of role and experience requirement, then I think it's a lot better to say, actually, I would feel more comfortable if I got 10% more because I know a lot of other companies offer this, but I really want to go with you guys and make my decision process easier, right? That's a lot easier to swallow than just like, I want a 10% increase. What you gave me is not enough. So levels.fyi is a great resource to help you arm yourself with the knowledge that you need to come to the table correct when you like ask for more.
I wanted to ask you a follow up question in regards to when you were saying that folks get nervous during that interview process, right? When folks sort of like freeze up. Uh, I'm curious, like, what is it that you do to like sort of calm yourself down? I know you had mentioned one methodology. Is there anything else or anything else that you wanted to encourage?
Yeah, I feel like part of the fear comes from a lack of experience and sometimes even preparation, right? Like if you haven't done something before, novel experiences tend to be scarier than things that you've done a bunch of times before, right? Also, if you aren't prepared for stuff, you're more likely to panic because you're not sure how you're going to get through something. Versus if you are fully prepared for something, you'll feel in a better place. That being said, that's not to say if you've prepared for this a lot and that you've done this countless times before, you're not going to get anxious. That can still happen, right? Everyone's situation is different and everyone in their own like health is different. So use the tools that I mentioned to help manage those like automated responses from your brain, right? Like the sympathetic nervous system is something that happens subconsciously, but you can override it consciously. So yeah, deep breathing for sure helps. I just always try to confirm to myself why I know I'll do well, right? Like I know I've done X, Y, and Z. I know what's going to be asked of me, and I've prepared in ABC manners. I should be good.
Yeah, and I know we've covered a lot of information here. If there was like a singular takeaway that folks could take home with them, what would you say that is? I heard practice a lot. I heard be
Yeah.
present. Yeah, that those technical skills are definitely important, but those soft skills, without them are really hard to get onto the next stage or the next round of interviews. Is there any one takeaway that you think stands out above the rest?
Yeah, I would say again that the interview process is, like I said before, a performative one. And when it comes to whiteboarding, it's not an exercise in solving that particular problem. It's always an exercise in communication and showcasing your problem solving abilities. So, my single takeaway would be to practice that skill of whiteboarding while keeping in mind what you're trying to demonstrate, right? When I say practice whiteboarding, I don't mean get good at solving algorithm problems via whiteboard, right? That's not what this is about. What I'm trying to say is get good at communicating things with a diagram, get good at communicating things with pseudocode, get good at being able to write out a full coded solution using your diagram and your pseudocode. If you get good at that, you'll feel 1,000 times more comfortable with your whiteboarding than you would before. especially if you were the type of person that started with code automatically, which again is something a lot of people do, and like I said, is unfortunately like not the best way to approach these problems. So,
Right on. Thank you. I wanted to turn it over to the
for sure.
audience and see if anybody had any questions before we wrap up our event. If not, we can always end it a couple minutes early and give y'all 10 minutes back so that you can do whatever it is that you need to do this evening. Carlos, did you want to add anything else?
Yeah, honestly, feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Any questions that you have, I'm always more than happy to help out in any way that I can, share whatever wisdom that I have. Don't hesitate. Yeah.
Yeah, and everybody here in attendance, I actually dropped my LinkedIn, Carlos's LinkedIn earlier in the event. You can check that out in the chat. All the resources that Carlos was mentioning are also listed out in the chat as well. Thank you all. If nobody has any questions, thank you all so much for your time. And we wish you all a great evening. And hopefully, we'll see you at another event soon. Sure
For
thing,
sure.
Anna. Thank you so much. Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
thank you guys.
Yeah, I
And
appreciate it. Thank you so
yes,
much
take care.
for sticking around. Take care. Have a good evening.
Have a great weekend too.
Yeah, the LinkedIn. Sure, we can certainly drop those. Give me 1 second. Okay, and then I saw that Carlos just dropped his.
Oh right,
Um,
yeah. That's such a Anna.
yeah,
That's such a weird feature of Zoom. I don't know why it does that. Like if you
yeah, it
join
should
a room
definitely
late,
not be like that. Yeah,
you
you should
can't
be
see
able
the
to
yeah.
allow. Yeah, we just added it there, and just want to make sure, Anna, that did you get the rest of the links that we shared as well? I'm gonna reshare them here just to make sure. There we go.
Wow, Richie's on top of it. Nice,
Right on, y'all. Awesome. That was
cool,
it,
nice
Anna.
Anna.
I hope you have a great evening, and we'll catch you all at the next event. Take care.
Cool. Take care, everyone.
Good night. Adios.